because we address the needs of Social Security into the next century so that Social Security will be solvent beyond 75 years and address the vital concerns of each and every American. In 2019, 64 million Americans received Social Security benefits totaling over $1 trillion. For nearly a third of our elderly beneficiaries, Social Security benefits are 90% of their total income. Two-thirds rely on Social Security for the majority of their income. The average benefit in 2019 per American was $17,600 for retired workers. And that works out to be about $18,000 for men and $14,000 for women. Not enough for most to live on. 178 million Americans are covered by Social Security today. 10,000, Mr. Speaker, 10,000 baby boomers a day become eligible for Social Security. Social Security helps lower and middle-income Americans the most. More than 90% of benefits go to beneficiaries earning less than $50,000. Let me repeat that again. More than 90% of all the benefits of Social Security go to people earning less than $50,000 a year. That's why the following individuals have supported the Social Security 2100 Act, including Social Security Works, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the AFL-CIO, the Alliance for Retired American, Paralyzed Veterans of America, Vote Vets, American Federation of Government Employees, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Latinos for a Secure Retirement, the National Organization of Women, SAGE, the National Education Society, the ARC of the United States, the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, representing administrative law judges, Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities and Social Security Task Force, the Justice and Aging, Association of University Senators on Disability, Senior Citizen League, the National Organization of Social Security Claimants, the EPI Policy Center, the National Retiree Legislative Network, Public Citizen, Credo Action, Progress America, Other 98, the Daily Costs, People's Action, the Diverse Elders Coalition, the National Employment Law Project, Freedom to Prosper, Move On, Union Veterans Council of the AFL-CIO, just to name a few, Madam Speaker. I want to start today by talking about having Secretary Mnuchin before the Ways and Means Committee this morning. I reminded Secretary Mnuchin and complimented the President for saying in his State of the Union message, his last two, how he was committed to protecting Social Security. While he is committed to protecting Social Security, his budgets have not reflected that, which was a point of concern we raised with Secretary Mnuchin, especially since, to give President Trump credit here, that during the campaign of 2016, when faced with 16 other Republicans who tried to force him to say that Social Security is an entitlement, President Trump, to his credit, said no, Social Security is an earned benefit. I asked Secretary Mnuchin if he believed that Social Security was an earned benefit. And he said, yes, it was. I also asked then, if that's the case and it's an earned benefit, it debunks a long-standing concern raised by the other side that Social Security is somehow an entitlement program, when in fact every American citizen knows because of FICA exactly what Social Security is. FICA stands for the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, but anyone can go to their pay stub and look at it. Federal Insurance Contribution. Whose contribution? Your contribution. Every American citizen's contribution. It is not a tax. The tax that is paid by an employer to your benefit is fully deductible. The employer gets to deduct it. The benefit for your contribution goes directly to the employee, and they get that in the way of pension guarantee, disability protection, spousal and dependent coverage, and a death benefit. The wisdom of Franklin Delano Roosevelt is always prescient, because they realized back in 1929, after the Great Depression, in this great capitalistic and entrepreneurial society that we live in, that sometime through no fault of your own, when something as disastrous as a stock market crash or an unanticipated virus were to take place, that disaster can prevail, and all of a sudden you would find yourself in a situation where you had not the means. And thus Congress, because of President Roosevelt, adopted the Social Security Act and paid for it through the federal insurance contribution. So this contribution, every citizen knows that it's their contribution that they make. And I commended President Trump for having said that, debating his other Republican opponents. But to date, the administration has not produced a plan that will protect Social Security, that will in fact expand Social Security the way it needs to be. In fact, the last time Social Security was expanded, there was a Republican president, there was a Republican Senate, and there was a Democratic House. The Democratic Speaker was Tip O'Neill, who led that effort. The Democratic Senate was led by, at the time, the leader of the Social Security movement was Robert Dole. The Senate Majority Leader was Howard Baker, and the President was Ronald Reagan. They understood bipartisanly that this is the American people's #1 insurance program, the #1 anti-poverty program. And you know what? We don't even have to go back to 2008. To 1929 to understand the impact and the need for Social Security. Historians are replete with the stories of the Great Crash. But we only have to go back as far as 2008. Because in 2008, this country experienced the Great Recession. Since that recession, in which many Americans saw their 401k become a 101k, and 90% of the American people have not recovered their wealth and assets that they lost in the recession of 2008. Let me repeat that, Madam Speaker. 90% of Americans have not recovered their wealth and assets from 2008. During that time, when many lost everything and companies turned away from defined benefit contributions and are getting out of the pension business, during that same time period, Social Security never missed a payment. Social Security never missed a pension payment, never missed a disability payment, never missed a spousal or dependent coverage payment, because it's the full faith and credit of the United States government and the nation's #1 insurance plan and the nation's #1 anti-poverty plan. But most recently, our dear colleague, John Lewis, reminded us, and in June of 2019, he rolled out, along with Danny Davis and Linda Sanchez and Terry Sewell and Gwen Moore and Jimmy Gomez and other members of the Ways and Means Committee, the fact that Social Security is a civil rights issue as well. A civil rights issue that has long gone unaddressed. It's been more than 37 years since Social Security was last fixed, and that was under Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan, and Howard Baker. It's been more than 50 years since Social Security was enhanced. Do you think things have changed for people in 37 years and in 50 years? Every American listening to this understands that that is the case. They have faithfully paid in to this earned benefit and have gotten in return a benefit, but one that needs to be changed and modified in a way that makes sure it's sustainably solvent into the next century and enhanced in the following ways that people like Danny Davis have advocated. Here's the 4 ways that we enhance Social Security. Number 1, we make sure that no one can retire into poverty. In the wealthiest nation in the world today, fellow American citizens who have paid all their quarters in to Social Security, who have worked all their lives, receive a Social Security check that is below the poverty level. Most of them happen to be women, and most of them happen to be women of color. It is the shame of this country that in the midst of the great prosperity and wealth, and frankly, in the midst of handing out a $2 trillion tax cut, of which 83% went to the nation's wealthiest percent, the nation's wealthiest 1%, that we could not find the will and the way to help out those who have worked all their lives and paid into the program. This is no handout. This is someone who, by the sweat of their brow and their work, earned a benefit that hasn't actuarially kept pace because in 1983 they didn't index it the way they should have. No one who's paid in their quarters should suffer for a mistake made by Congress. Congress needs to correct that. So now the new floor for Social Security will become 125% of what the poverty level is, so that no one who works their whole life and pays in their quarters can retire into poverty. The second thing we do is make sure that there's a 2% across the board increase. Nobody gets wealthy on Social Security. On average, a male earns approximately $18,000 in Social Security payments, and a female, $14,000. Nobody's getting wealthy on Social Security, but yet it is the subsistence amount of money necessitated to make ends meet. So a modest 2% increase will be spent right back into the very communities that they live in. On average, every congressional district has 145,000 people who receive Social Security. So in each one of our 435 districts, 145,000 people will be spending money back in those communities, recognizing that this is an economic stimulus bill. In fact, most recently, Jason Furman coming before the Ways and Means Committee talked about this as an economic stimulus, as has Larry Summers and other economists who have taken a look at the ways that we need to stimulate our economy by making sure that those amongst us who need the money most and who spend that money directly back in the community on the necessities of life, like heating and cooling their home, providing the fuel that allows them to operate their automobiles, like making sure that they have food and nutrition and physical therapy and pays for doctor's visits and also prescriptions. These are what we're doing to expand this bill with a 2% increase, and then also making sure that there's a COLA that reflects people's actual costs that they incur. How so? A COLA that the AARP calls CPIE, E standing for elderly, but I would also say standing for the essential benefits that elderly need. Again, heating and cooling your home, prescription drugs, doctor's visits, physical therapy, the very food that you put on your table. These are essential for life. That's what you go in to figuring out what your COLA is, and that's what this bill reflects. This bill also reflects the idea that a lot of people continue to work beyond retirement age. But most people don't realize that if you're single and making more than $24,000, your Social Security is taxed. If you're a married couple and making more than $32,000, your Social Security is taxed. Because again, back in 1983, they didn't index this. We changed that. We index Social Security now, and 12 million Americans will get a tax break because of that. So, making sure that no one can retire into poverty, having a modest 2% across the board increase, Having a COLA that reflects your actual expenses and providing a tax break is at the core of this bill. In the new and added improvements of the bill, including those led by Danny Davis, to make sure that grandmothers and grandparents, to make sure that students, to make sure that widows are getting extra money to raise the children that they are responsible for, also was included in this legislation, as well as introducing an earned income tax credit so that nobody earning $50,000 and below will have to pay an increase in taxes and in contribution to make sure that the money is going where it's needed the most to help people at the lower end of the pay scale to get the kind of benefits that the Social Security 2100 Act provides. And with that, I'm going to yield to the gentleman from the great state of Illinois, as I like to refer to him, because I've heard no better voice in Congress, the voice of God, Danny Davis.
Well, thank you, sir. I want to thank you indeed. As a matter of fact, as I was listening, I was saying to myself, after a good sermon, all that you really say is amen. And I want to say amen to you. And I say that in all seriousness because the number one advocate for an expanded Social Security in this House of Representatives is none other than Representative John Larson. And I thank you for your diligence, for the consistency. When you walk in my office, there's a photograph of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And that photograph has been there ever since I've been here. But I had that photograph before I came here because the work and the leadership, the vision that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had has been transformed and passed on to people like yourself and to you. And I'm so proud to be able to say that I served with you in this House of Representatives on the Committee on Ways and Means, and the fact that you chair the Social Security Committee and the Social Security effort. The only other thing that I really would need to say and would want to say, I've always been told that you can measure the effectiveness of a society, that you make an assessment of how well it treats its young, how well it treats its old, and how well it treats those who have difficulty caring for themselves. I couldn't help but think of my father as I listened to you, who was 92 years old when he died. But he had a good life. As a matter of fact, he spent the last 5 years of his life living with me on the weekends whenever I came home. And he always wanted to pay for things. You know, we'd stop for dinner, and he'd say to my wife, "Vera, I'm going to treat you for dinner." And his Social Security check was $500 and something a month, which obviously would not have been enough if he had to live alone and care for himself and all of that. But I'd go ahead and let him pay. I said, okay, well, if you want to pay for dinner, go right ahead. And he'd pay. When I stopped to get gasoline as the tank was being filled, he'd say, "Here, let me pay for it." He'd reach and get his money. And we were getting gas, and at the time, gasoline was very high. It went up to $40.
Wow.
$50, $60, $70. He said, "I guess you better go ahead and pay for it." You don't have to worry.
He's a smart man.
But again, we've got to expand it. We've got to keep it. We've got to make sure that it provides for the individuals it's designed to provide for. It's not a gift. It's not a giveaway. It's an entitlement that people work for. And so I'm proud to join with you in saying that we've got to make Social Security everything that it ought to be. And where you lead, I will follow, and we'll help make it happen. So thank you very much, and I'm going to yield back, and this just about ends my day.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I deeply appreciate your efforts, Mr. Davis, and I love the story about your father because that just demonstrates the dignity and the worth of a lifetime of work, but he wanted to pay. He wanted to continue to contribute because he knew how important it was. And it wasn't no handout. He worked for it all of his life. He contributed into it. And now we're faced with a decision in Congress on our watch, not sometime down the future, but now, for you up there listening in the audience, as we speak this year, Social Security will start paying out more money than it's taking in. It hasn't been adjusted in 37 years. There's nothing that you can leave untouched that requires actuarial attention, and specifically the attention of Congress, that left untouched will continue to flourish. And yet Social Security has never missed a payment. Not for disability, not for spousal or dependent coverage, and not for a pension. It is America's insurance plan. It is our #1 anti-poverty program as well. It's why I'm so grateful that Danny and others have pointed this out as a civil rights issue as well. Because of the way for so long people of color, especially black males, have been discriminated against. Also, when you look at women and you understand that for women of color, they were receiving 56 cents for every dollar their white male counterparts were. 80 cents for white women, 53 cents for Hispanic women. That is simply unfair. And in this day and age, we can correct that. And we can do it simply by doing what Roosevelt asked us to do. Make a contribution. What does that contribution go towards? It goes towards a pension, a disability payment, dependent coverage, and a spousal benefit. That's a pretty good deal. You can't buy that anywhere in the private sector. And I come from one of the insurance capitals of the world, where when you went to insurance school, they taught you about the 3 legs on the stool. And the most important leg on that stool, Social Security, because that was the floor. That was the safety net from which nothing could fall through. We don't ever want to see another crash like 1929. But again, understand that since 2008, 90% of Americans are struggling because they haven't recovered their wealth and assets. 68% of all millennials who will need Social Security more than baby boomers have only Social Security to rely on. They have no pension or no 401k. And while we should do everything to make that more possible, the plausible reality And what government can do is at hand. First and foremost, make Social Security solvent. And then secondly, make sure that it's solvent for more than 75 years and addresses baby boomers and millennials and future generations, and does so with modest benefits that end the inequality that exists, but also provides basic economic sustenance so that our economies can thrive. Both Jason Furman and Larry Summers, and I think Secretary Mnuchin would even agree with this today. They were talking about, in the face of the coronavirus, which, by the way, is age-related and will impact the elderly and people in the age groups of 60 to 70 and 70 to 80 far more than it will impact any other generation, and will do so in a way that they better have the wherewithal. And they were talking about means to stimulate the economy. The number one way to stimulate the economy is to give those modest benefits to the very people, 145,000 on average in every congressional district. Those modest benefits that are spent directly right back into the communities that they live in, with the necessities of life that are needed to sustain their existence. Would you agree, Dan?
I agree wholeheartedly. As a matter of fact, if you really want to touch and move the economy, it's to make sure that those individuals at the very bottom are able to contribute. You see, I always say that money to a community is like blood to the body. No matter how sophisticated we are in terms of medicine and health, if all the blood leaves your body, in all likelihood, you're going to die. If in communities that are considered low income, senior citizen villages, places where people live in senior housing, unless those individuals have resources to plow back into the environment, then those will always be low income, no money, no resources, no business, no opportunities, no hope. And so if we really want to make America be the America that we dreamed about, talked about, hope about, but has never been, then Social Security is the way to do it. Every person who works, who reaches a certain age, retirement can be a good thing.
Exactly.
If you've got enough resource to retire without wondering if you're going to have to cut your bills in half or not pay the light bill or pay the rent or have enough money to purchase the food that you want, where you're not scraping and looking for coupons and looking for special sales and special opportunities. And that's what happens to many of our senior citizens. They have to look and see if there's an item on sale so that they'll be able to acquire. And so if we make sure that there is sufficient resources for people to live on, then at my church, they'd say that you're doing the work of the master. So it's no better way to do it, no more effective, no more efficient, and I'm just pleased that we have this opportunity to do this and do it now.
And we do, and it's on our watch. And I can't emphasize this enough for every member of Congress and every person out there in America that's listening to C-SPAN right now. or to this program. It's on our watch. It's our responsibility. We cannot continue to kick the can down the road. Doing nothing means a 20% cut to people's benefits. Doing nothing, let me repeat that again, means a 20% cut to people's benefits. Now, there are some that are fine with that, but most, on both sides of the aisle, are not in favor of that. And here's what the polling data shows. It shows that Social Security is bipartisan. 77% of Americans believe, 84% of Democrats, 69% of Republicans, 76% of independents said they would be willing to pay a little more to make sure that their benefits are not cut and that they are protected and expanded. 91% of workers and 94% of retirees would feel betrayed. That's 91% of workers, 94% of retirees would feel betrayed if the money they paid into Social Security was not available to them. And the Gallup poll found, this most recent one, that Social Security ranked fourth amongst the things that keep people up at night and worried with respect to their security. Fourth in importance after education, health care, and their financial security. And they often lump the financial security and Social Security together. I would just like to close by also, I mentioned Jason Furman, who was the former Obama National Economic Council advisor, and Larry Summers, the former Clinton Treasury Secretary, both who are serving up at Harvard, who have written extensively about the importance of making sure, as an economic stimulus and out of necessity, that we make the improvements that should have been done 37 years ago, but desperately need to be taken up today, not only for current generations and baby boomers retiring, but for millennials and future generations. Alicia Manel, the current director for the Center for Retirement Research and former member of the President's Council on Economic Advisors and former Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at the Federal Reserve in Boston, said, look, we have to protect Social Security. Policymakers should fix Social Security by raising incrementally over time the money necessitated to do it. It doesn't come from heaven. We need to maintain benefits. People don't have anything else other than their 401ks, and a significant portion of the population doesn't even have those. Social Security is the forced savings plan that people have paid into and have counted on, and as I've said before, it's never missed a payment. Monique Morrissey, economist and from the Economic Policy Institute, expanding Social Security ensures steady contributions. It keeps costs low and prevents leakage, and it pools longevity risk. Moreover, Social Security pay-as-you-go financing provides an internal rate of return tied to economic growth, but without the gyrations. Dean Baker, senior economist for the Economic and Policy Research. Social Security 2100 becomes law, it would both improve the program's benefit structure and its financial picture. After adjusting for prices and wages having risen 1.5% annually over the last 5 years, Social Security 2100 would only be a small impact on the pay increase of a new FICA tax. This was in Economy for All on November 12, 2019, and the Congressional Budget Office also reports this. This will be the only bill that we will be able to vote on this year that both reduces the national debt by $525 billion and expands and improves Social Security. Let me repeat that again. CBO has said that Social Security 2100 is both PAYGO compliant, and because the program is fully paid for, reduces the national debt by $525 billion over time and enhances the existence of Social Security, making it solvent for future generations beyond 75 years. And with that, I yield back my time unless the gentleman from Illinois has a final word.
The final word is only make sure that Social Security is in your plans and be ready to accept it when we get it.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields.